You've noticed the difference and you can't quite articulate what it is at first, but there's something fundamentally distinct about how a woman in her late 30s or 40s approaches intimacy compared to someone in her early 20s. It's not just experience, though experience plays a role. It's not just confidence, though that's part of it. There's an intensity, a directness, a lack of performance that changes the entire dynamic. Younger women often approach sexuality with a kind of self-consciousness, aware of how they look, how they sound, whether they're doing it right, whether you're impressed. There's a layer of anxiety beneath the desire, a need to be validated, to be told they're attractive, to receive confirmation that they're desirable. And that anxiety, however subtle, creates distance. It makes intimacy feel like a presentation rather than a connection, like something being performed rather than something being shared. But with older women, that layer is often gone. They're not performing for your approval, they're engaging because they want to. And that shift from seeking validation to expressing desire changes everything about the experience. Part of this comes from the dissolution of shame that happens over time. Younger women carry a tremendous amount of cultural conditioning about what they're supposed to want, how they're supposed to behave, what makes them too much or not enough. They've internalized messages about being desirable but not too forward, interested but not too eager, passionate but not too demanding. And navigating those contradictions creates hesitation, creates a kind of filtered engagement where they're constantly monitoring themselves, adjusting, performing the role of sexually available without actually claiming their own desire fully. But as women age, as they accumulate experiences and realize that those rules were always arbitrary, that policing their own desire serves no one, something shifts. They stop asking permission to want what they want. They stop pretending to be less interested than they are to preserve some imagined mystique. They stop treating their sexuality as something that needs to be carefully managed to maintain value. And that liberation, that willingness to be direct about desire without apology, that's what creates the intensity you're sensing. There's also the reality that older women have less time to waste on mediocrity. They've been through enough relationships, enough disappointing encounters, enough situations where they prioritized someone else's pleasure over their own or stayed silent about what they actually needed, that they're no longer willing to accept that dynamic. They know what they like, they know what works for their bodies, and they're not interested in pretending otherwise to protect someone's ego. If something isn't working, they'll say so. Not with cruelty, but with clarity, because they've learned that suffering through bad intimacy to avoid awkward conversation is a terrible trade. And that directness, that willingness to communicate rather than hint, to guide rather than endure, it makes the experience better for both people. You're not left guessing. You're not performing in the dark hoping you're doing it right. You're being told explicitly what works, and that removes the anxiety that kills presence for so many men. Another dimension is that older women have usually stopped tying their self-worth to sexual desirability in the same way younger women do. For younger women, being wanted sexually often feels like validation of their entire worth as a person. It confirms they're attractive enough, interesting enough, valuable enough. And because so much is riding on that validation, sex becomes fraught with meaning beyond the act itself. It's not just about pleasure or connection, it's about proving something, about securing reassurance, about maintaining a certain image. But older women have typically developed enough self-worth from other sources, from career, from friendships, from personal accomplishments, from simply surviving and growing through life's challenges, that they don't need sexual validation to feel okay about themselves. Sex becomes about pleasure and connection rather than ego maintenance, and when ego isn't in the room, intimacy gets to be more honest, more vulnerable, more intense. There's also something about biological reality that shifts priorities. Younger women often have the luxury of being passive, of waiting to be pursued, of letting desire unfold slowly because time feels infinite. But as women age, as fertility becomes a consideration whether they want children or not, as they become more aware of time's limits, there's often a shift from passive reception to active pursuit. Not desperate pursuit, but intentional engagement. They know what they want, and they're willing to go after it rather than waiting for it to come to them. And that agency, that willingness to initiate, to express interest clearly, to take what they want rather than hoping it will be offered, that changes the entire energy of sexual dynamics. You're not chasing someone who's strategically creating distance. You're meeting someone who's equally invested, equally present, equally engaged in making the experience good. What also happens with age is a kind of emotional integration that younger women often haven't achieved yet. Younger women frequently split sexuality from emotional intimacy, either treating sex as something casual and disconnected or as something that only happens within the context of deep emotional commitment. But older women often understand that sexuality exists on a spectrum, that it can be intense and meaningful without requiring lifelong commitment, that you can have profound physical connection with someone without that connection needing to define your entire relationship. That nuanced understanding allows for more freedom, more exploration, more willingness to engage deeply without the weight of needing every encounter to mean something beyond what it actually is. And that freedom creates space for intensity without pressure, for passion without performance, for connection without obligation. There's also the reality that older women have usually worked through a lot of the trauma and baggage that complicates sexuality for younger women. They've had time to process past experiences, to heal from relationships that were damaging, to develop boundaries that protect them without closing them off. They're not bringing unresolved pain into every new interaction, not using sex to prove something or fix something or avoid something. They're engaging from a more integrated place, which means they can be more present, more authentic, more willing to be vulnerable without that vulnerability triggering old wounds. And when both people can be present without carrying ghosts into the room, when both people can engage authentically without defensive patterns taking over, the intensity of connection increases exponentially. The confidence that comes with age also plays a massive role. Younger women are often so concerned with how their bodies look, whether they measure up to some impossible standard, whether you're judging them, that they can't fully relax into pleasure. They're monitoring themselves constantly, aware of angles and lighting and whether everything looks the way it's supposed to look. But older women have typically made peace with their bodies in ways that younger women haven't. They know their bodies aren't perfect according to cultural standards, and they've stopped caring. They know that real desire isn't about perfection, it's about presence, about connection, about being fully engaged rather than perfectly presented. And that self-acceptance allows them to inhabit their bodies more fully, to feel pleasure more deeply, to stop performing and start experiencing. And when someone is actually experiencing rather than performing, you can feel the difference immediately. What you're encountering with older women isn't just sexual skill, though skill develops with experience. It's psychological freedom. It's the freedom to want without shame, to ask without apologizing, to take pleasure without guilt, to be direct without fear of being too much. It's the freedom that comes from realizing that trying to be what you think someone else wants is exhausting and unsatisfying, and that being yourself, messy and direct and honest, actually creates better connection. It's the freedom that comes from having been disappointed enough times that you stop prioritizing someone else's comfort over your own experience. It's the freedom that comes from understanding that sexuality isn't a commodity to be carefully rationed to maintain value. It's an expression of aliveness that becomes richer when it's claimed fully rather than performed carefully. And for men who are used to younger women, who are used to dynamics where they're expected to lead entirely, where the woman is passive or hesitant or performing, encountering this level of directness and agency can be disorienting at first. It requires you to show up differently, to match that intensity rather than trying to create it unilaterally, to engage as an equal rather than as someone managing another person's uncertainty. But once you adjust, once you stop expecting performance and start engaging with presence, you realize that this is what intimacy actually feels like when both people are fully there, when both people have done enough internal work to show up authentically, when both people are willing to be vulnerable without needing the vulnerability to be carefully managed. That's the intensity you're sensing, not just sexual technique, but psychological freedom translating into physical expression. And once you've experienced that, once you've felt what it's like to be with someone who's claiming their desire rather than performing it, going back to dynamics built on hesitation and performance feels hollow by comparison.